Good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Tolhurst, and I'm the president of Owners of Maine. We're a statewide nonprofit grassroots gun rights advocacy group. Thanks for inviting me to speak here to you tonight. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our organization and what we do, as well as about a very serious matter which concerns all Mainers, but one in which you as Hancock County Republicans can play an especially important role. The Constitution of the state of Maine begins with Article 1, the Declaration of Rights, which lays out the fundamental rights that are guaranteed to all people. The very first sentence in the Declaration of Rights reads, "All people are born equally free and independent, and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life." Now, that seems only right and proper to me, that the inherent and inalienable right to enjoy and to defend life is given the prominence of first mention. Because without the right to life and the right to defend life, the other rights can have little meaning. However, merely having the right to defend life is not enough. One must also have the means, or the right is meaningless. For this reason, our Declaration of Rights continues in Section 16, "Every citizen has a right to keep and bear arms, and this right shall never be questioned." Now, this is perhaps the most straightforward and forceful provision of its type in any state constitution. Clear, unconditional, and with an unmistakable emphasis on its strict observance baked right in. This provision of Maine's Constitution isn't a relic dating from centuries past either. Maine citizens voted to amend the Constitution in 1987, not merely affirming this provision, but strengthening it. So, who is Owners of Maine anyway? Well, we're a nonprofit civil rights group dedicated to the preservation of the right to keep and bear arms guaranteed under the Constitution of the state of Maine. We're made up of volunteers from all over the state who work to educate and inform citizens regarding gun rights and gun law, and to advocate for the rights of Mainers before the legislature and the executive branch of state government, as well as local government, and to organize grassroots action and ensure that gun owners have an effective voice in their government. Of course, Owners of Maine is hardly the only gun rights organization out there. One can't talk about gun rights without mentioning the National Rifle Association, and here in Maine, we also have the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. So how's Owners of Maine any different from those organizations? Well, the difference really lies in focus and composition. While NRA and SAM are valuable and respected allies in the gun rights world, both organizations have a broad array of other issues that form part of their missions. NRA is involved in all aspects of firearm use, from hunting to competition to range development and more. SAM is involved in hunting, fishing, conservation, and many other outdoor sporting issues. These are all important and worthy topics, but at Owners of Maine, we focus on gun issues alone. That focus means our position and our effectiveness on gun rights issues doesn't get tangled up in the politics of other issues. The other difference is our composition. NRA and SAM function as institutional advocates, and they're quite good at that. When gun rights legislation is being considered in Augusta, legislators certainly want to know what NRA and SAM have to say on the issue. But Owners of Maine brings something different to the table, the genuine voice of grassroots Maine gun owners. Legislators listen to the viewpoints of lobbyists and interest groups all day long, but they start to take notice when they get a flood of calls and letters from real citizens. They take note when scores or hundreds of citizens lose a day of work to show up to testify before their committees. It is this grassroots power that makes Owners of Maine different. Now, I bet a lot of you have never heard of Owners of Maine, and that's not surprising. We're really quite a young organization. We were born online as a social network community, initially as a simple interest group for gun owners. We evolved into a source of solid and reliable information on gun law, gun rights, and current gun legislation, an area which seems especially susceptible to myth and misinformation. We developed a reputation as the place to go to get definitive information from our community of knowledgeable shooters, collectors, dealers, veteran gun rights activists, attorneys, and more. We expanded our online presence through a website to disseminate information on gun laws and gun bills. And in early 2013, we finally made the transition from an informal organization to a formal Maine nonprofit corporation organized as a social welfare organization. This past February marked our 3rd anniversary as a formally incorporated entity. We've grown from a few dozen people on a social network group to an organization with hundreds and hundreds of paying members, thousands of donors of financial support, and capable of reaching tens of thousands of people. So now that you know who we are and where we came from, what is it that we do exactly? Well, on a day-to-day basis, we provide a community and a communication channel for our extended network of associate members, over 10,000 strong, to provide information about guns, gun policy, gun law, and gun legislation. Anything from answering questions about what's the best choice of a gun for a particular use or where to find a particular type of ammunition, to commonly asked or not so commonly asked questions about state or federal gun law, to posting news articles and updates on pending legislation in Maine or beyond. Now, the informational role that we play is at the very heart of what we do. It seems there are very few topics which attract and foster more myth and misinformation than guns and gun laws, and there are very few places for people to turn for trustworthy information. We take a lot of pride in providing what is probably the best source of such information in the state of Maine, combining the knowledge of experts and the wisdom of crowds. We like to think that Gun Owners of Maine is where gun misinformation comes to die. Beyond this informational role, however, we foster a sense of community among the gun-owning public, a cohort which tends toward rugged individualists. By establishing that sense of community, and more than just community, but a sense of effectiveness as a community, we bring more and more people into civic involvement with their government, many for the very first time. We also provide original reporting on gun-related issues, including interviews with legislators who sponsor bills on gun-related topics, and analysis of policy proposals. We track the progress of bills through the legislative process and alert our members and the public when their input is needed. And, especially important this time of year, we score political office holders on their statements, votes, and actions involving gun rights and offer a report card on their performance in office at election time. In addition to informing and educating gun owners, we also directly advocate for gun rights before the legislature and with the executive branch agencies. We regularly offer testimony on bills which affect gun rights and work directly with state and local agencies, sometimes in an advisory role and occasionally in a watchdog role. So what have we actually accomplished? Quite a bit for a young organization, I think. Just in this last legislature, we've helped pass a number of bills which protect and enhance gun rights and helped defeat a number of bills which would have restricted gun rights, and made a substantial contribution to firearms education and safety. One of the first things we did was, after the Bangor Daily News wanted to obtain a list of concealed handgun permit owners and publish that list duplicating work that had been done in New York State by another newspaper there, we helped support Corey Wilson's confidentiality bill, which was, I think, LD 345 back then, which passed overwhelmingly as an emergency bill. Since then, we've helped expand the number of states that recognize Maine's concealed handgun permit. And as a result, 3 additional states have recognized Maine's permit just since January: Florida, Georgia, and finally, at long last, New Hampshire. We helped legalize suppressor hunting in Maine, finally joining the other 38 states which permit hunting with a sound suppressor. And then we helped the agency draft its suppressor permit application and procedures. We supported the range protection legislation, which recently passed, which keeps municipalities from abusing their ordinance and rulemaking power to unfairly restrict or shut down established shooting ranges. And we helped pass the bill protecting the gun rights of tenants in state-subsidized housing. And we helped repeal a quaint and useless 1950s-era ban on automatic knives. But our biggest accomplishment to date has been adding Maine to the growing ranks of constitutional carry states. In the early years of the 20th century, states began passing laws restricting the carry of concealed firearms. Maine did so in 1917. And for almost a century, Mainers have had to ask permission from their government to exercise that right to keep and bear arms that wasn't supposed to be questioned. Interestingly, one state never passed such a law. Our very own New England neighbor, Vermont, has never restricted the carry of firearms. Doesn't seem to have done any harm for them. We made passing a constitutional carry law our legislative priority for 2015 and coordinated grassroots support for the bill, generating many, many calls and letters to legislators in support of the bill as it moved through the legislative process. On the day of the public hearing on this and the other gun bills, we brought 300 Mainers to the State House to show support and to testify in favor of the bill. Now that's 300 real people, not paid lobbyists in immaculate suits and shiny shoes. Hundreds of ordinary people who took a day off of work, maybe losing a day's pay, and traveling from all over the state to fill up the committee room, the overflow rooms, the halls, and the welcome center, to wait for hours upon hours in order to testify for 3 minutes before the committee and speak their minds. I believe that show of support and commitment was crucial in the passage of constitutional carry. Constitutional carry became law in Maine on October 15th, 2015. It's been the law for almost 8 months at this point. Now, everyone may not be familiar with what constitutional carry, or it's also called permitless carry, is, so let me explain just briefly. Here's what it does. If you are 21 years of age or older, or if you're 18 to 20 years of age and on active duty or an honorably discharged member of the military or National Guard, and you're not otherwise prohibited from possessing or carrying a firearm, you may carry a concealed firearm without obtaining a permit. This applies to residents of Maine as well as to non-residents visiting Maine. Now, permits still exist, and you can still get one. Or if you have one, you can renew it. In fact, there's several very good reasons to continue to have a permit in spite of the fact that we now have constitutional carry, like the aforementioned out-of-state recognition. If you don't have a permit, other states can't recognize it. Now, constitutional carry does not make it easier for criminals to buy guns. In fact, it has nothing whatsoever to do with gun purchases or transfers. It does not make it legal for criminals to carry a gun. If a person was prohibited from possessing a gun before constitutional carry, it's still illegal for them to do it now. Constitutional carry does not make it legal to openly carry a handgun. But that's only because it's always been legal to openly carry a handgun in Maine. It was only illegal to put a windbreaker over it. Now, during the legislative debate on constitutional carry, despite the popular support for the bill, many legislators were still uncomfortable with losing the training requirement that the concealed handgun permit required. And despite the evidence from other constitutional carry states that showed no negative effect from constitutional carry. To ease those concerns, and because Gun Owners of Maine is second to none in its concern for safety and its regard for training, we made a solemn promise to the House of Representatives on the day that the House voted on LD 652. What we promised, and I actually have a copy of what we passed out to every House member in the chamber that day, we made a solemn promise that if constitutional carry were to become law, Gun Owners of Maine would develop and operate a universally available, high-quality training course for handgun safety, and make it available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have it deployed by the effective date of the law. We kept that commitment and created what we call the Statewide Access to Firearms Education and Resources System, or SAFER. Now, SAFER is an online distance learning course, similar to what colleges and businesses use routinely. Even certified Maine law enforcement officers use such courses to keep up their certification requirements for continuing education. It's a multimedia course incorporating video instruction by a certified firearms trainer and a licensed attorney expert in Maine firearms law, as well as textual information. Every lesson is concluded with a quiz that tests the student's understanding of the material and requires a passing grade before they progress to the next lesson. The course goes well beyond the training requirements for a Maine concealed handgun permit and gives a good grounding in basic firearm safety, loading and unloading various types of handguns, the laws regarding firearms, use of force, self-defense, where firearms cannot be carried, and more. The student is also able to interact with live instructors in order to ask questions. It emphasizes the values of the firearm community, including responsibility, safety, and continued learning and training. At the conclusion of the course, the student is well prepared to continue his or her training with a live instructor. SAFER is intended to teach safety, values, and the law. It's not intended to teach shooting skills, because that's really hard to do online. But by the conclusion of the SAFER course, however, the student will be very well prepared to continue his or her training with a live instructor. In fact, SAFER provides a directory of instructors where students can continue their training, and we invite instructors to use SAFER as the classroom portion of their own training programs. Now, since SAFER launched a week before constitutional carry took effect in Maine, hundreds of people have completed the course, and at their own convenience and at no cost. In the 90-plus years that Maine required a permit to carry a concealed weapon, the state of Maine never produced a free, universally available firearm safety training course, but we're proud to have produced this first-of-its-kind course in 90 days at no cost to anyone and as a service to the people of Maine. But enough about the past. In the present, we have a problem. Maine is under attack. It's under attack by powerful and wealthy out-of-state interests who are determined to bend our laws to their will, using our citizen initiative process to mold Maine into their idea of a progressive nanny state. We've seen this not long ago with the Bear referendum and the massive influx of out-of-state money coupled with fraud and abuse to buy a place on our ballot, and yet more money to propagandize our citizens. And today we're seeing it again, as the New York billionaire and Slurpee banning former mayor Michael Bloomberg has set his sights on Maine to enact very reasonable sounding but insidious universal background checks. Such bills have been introduced in our legislature many times, and in other states many times as well. They have also been defeated many times, and for very good reasons. Having no success in the state legislatures, Mr. Bloomberg has taken his crusade to the people, specifically the people who live in states with initiative and referendum, like Maine. With money to buy a place on our ballot and to blanket the media with propaganda, he hopes to win here. This misleadingly named bill, which would more honestly be titled the Maine Private Firearm Transfer Ban, would criminalize ordinary behavior which Mainers engage in every day. It would require virtually every transfer of a firearm, even temporary loans, to be conducted at a licensed firearm dealer, where a formal federal record will be made of the transfer and an FBI background check conducted on the recipient. Further, when a loaned firearm is returned to its owner, it will require another trip to the dealer, another record, and another background check on the person to whom that firearm belongs. To get it back, you're going to have a background check. And of course, the dealer will charge a fee for this service, both times. Now, you may have heard that this bill contains exceptions to cover certain transfers, like hunting or between family members, and that is true. It is also deeply and purposely misleading. In reality, the so-called hunting exception is not what you may think it is. If you loan a rifle or shotgun to a friend or neighbor to go hunting in the morning, you're going to both become criminals. The hunting exception is very narrow and only applies while you and the transferee are actually out in the field, actually engaged in hunting. The same applies to the shooting range exception. The self-defense exception in the law is even narrower and in practical terms, non-existent. There's also an exception for transfers between family members, but even here the exception is less than it appears. For instance, a great-grandfather cannot give a firearm to his great-grandson. And while the law purports to make an exception for what it defines as intimate partners, the law defines that term in a way that probably includes nobody. So unmarried persons are living together are out of luck, as are blended families of unmarried couples. It simply won't apply to them. There will be no exception for them. Bear in mind as well that all of these exceptions, as narrowly crafted as they already are only present in order to make this bill more palatable. If a half-century's experience with gun control has shown anything, it's that these exceptions will be removed as soon as possible after passage, starting with the family exception. Now there's another, not so obvious and completely outrageous ban buried deep in this bill. This measure would result in 18 to 20-year-old adults having their right to buy a handgun ripped away from them, even if they're military servicemen or law enforcement cadets or officers. Under current federal law, licensed dealers may only transfer a handgun to persons 21 years of age or older. 18 to 20-year-olds may buy handguns via private sales. This bill, however, by requiring licensed dealers to process all transfers, would lock young adults out forever. This result is no mistake or happy accident on the part of the bill's drafters either. The billionaire patron of this bill had the best legal talent in the country available to him to draft this bill. None of its well-camouflaged negative effects are by chance. Now you may be thinking, I'm in favor of background checks. We don't want criminals and crazy people getting guns, do we? Well, of course we don't. But do background checks actually accomplish that, or do they accomplish something else? The Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, they got a new part of their name a few years back, compiles statistics on the source of crime guns. And these statistics were cited by the National Institute of Justice in a 2013 policy memo on gun control strategies. The federal government's own numbers show that almost half of all crime guns are obtained by criminals come through background-checked dealer transactions. Background checks don't work because criminals don't subject themselves to them. They have a girlfriend or a buddy with a clean record buy the gun for them, or they buy one on the street, or they steal one because they're not stupid. So what we're really looking at here is extending these background checks that are already criminals' preferred method of obtaining a gun to private transfers, which are not the number one source of crime guns. So what really is the purpose of these background checks? Well, the purpose is twofold, really. First, it's to force all transfers through licensed dealers to ensure that records are generated as to the whereabouts of every firearm transferred. And if, incidentally, it happens to be an expensive inconvenience to gun owners, well, that's just a nice bonus. But it is the second purpose of this background check bill that's the real danger. Its purpose is to fail. The backers of this bill know that it will accomplish nothing to reduce crime. They know this because background checks have never succeeded anywhere they've been tried. They also know this because they know that people will ignore the law, as residents of Oregon have after passing a nearly identical law. Background check records there show that only 2% of the background checks being run are for private transfers. And this is in a state where they tell us that 40% of transfers are private transfers. Yet only 2% of the background checks run are for private transfers. What this means is that Oregonians are ignoring universal background check in droves, and every one of them who does is being turned into a criminal. Failure of the background check law is designed in because the law is unenforceable. There is no way, short of a confession, to determine that a gun wasn't transferred in accordance with the law. In order to do that, you'd need a firearm registry. You'd need to know where every gun belongs, so when it turns up somewhere else, you know that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And that is the real purpose of this law, to lay the groundwork for a universal firearm registry. Now, that might sound paranoid. I understand that. Unless you read that NIJ policy memo that I mentioned. In it, NIJ Deputy Director Greg Ridgway explicitly writes that universal background check effectiveness, quote, depends on the ability to reduce straw purchasing and requiring gun registration. They know this is what is necessary to make the law work. UBC not only needs registration to work, it actually accomplishes most of the work to establish a registry by requiring all transfers to go through dealers and completion of the federal Form 4473, the data needed to produce a registry will be gathered. And there's already on our books a Maine law that gives the state the power to demand that information from each gun dealer. For those of you who like to look things up, that's Title 15, Section 455 in Maine statutes. It allows any police officer, prosecuting attorney, sheriff, game warden, constable, and so on to demand a state copy of that Form 4473. The state already has the authority to gather it together. So it would really establish a de facto registry, and all that remains is to actually go around and gather up the information using the legal authority that already exists. Now, when background checks fail to reduce violent crime, imagine that, it's not going to work. When it's apparent that people are ignoring the law, gun control forces will have a ready fix for the problem. Establish a universal firearm registry. That's been the goal of the gun control movement for decades. The bill is a Trojan horse, cynically designed to fail, intended only to justify its own successor. Now, the backers of this measure have already pumped about $2 million, a little more than $2 million into the Maine campaign. That was just to buy a place on our ballot and to tee up for the coming election session. That's before they've spent a dollar on media. The big push is yet to come with a media blitz to convince Mainers to vote for this grand deception. It's said that $5 million will be spent to pass UBC, which is pocket change for Mr. Bloomberg. And by the way, if you look at the Maine Ethics Commission's campaign finance reports for the 2 ballot question committees that are pushing this thing, you will find, well, the last one I looked at, 99.75% of the $2 million raised on that report came from Michael Bloomberg's Every Town for Gun Safety, and the remaining 0.25% came from actual individual donors. There's nothing grassroots about this effort. This is all out-of-state money. But anyhow, and just wrapping up, we desperately need you as Hancock County Republicans to know the truth about this bill and the motives of those behind it. Too many of those in southern Maine are going to be taken in by this and the propaganda they're going to be showered with by the Bloomberg machine. We cannot let them succeed, or they will replicate this success on other progressive issues and turn Maine into their own private social laboratory using our citizen initiative process. We cannot compete with the limitless funding that Michael Bloomberg is providing, but we do have people like you, real Mainers, who value your rights and our state's self-determination. I'd like to ask you to help us beat back this dangerous attack on our rights and our very identity. This is a bill that sounds better and better the less you know about it. Ignorance is our opponent's most potent tool, and sunshine is ours. To defeat this bill at the ballot in November, we need people to know the truth of UBC. We've been distributing tens of thousands of little business cards like this that highlight some of the problems with the bill and direct people to a website for more information. We have posters. We have up front here, we have some annotated copies of the law, the actual legislative language of the law, and plain language explanations of why the bill does what we say it does. We've been accused many times of exaggerating the dangers of this bill and outright lying. And I find that those accusations mostly come from people who haven't read the bill. When we show them the language, when we explain to them what it means, they're astonished to find out that we weren't lying at all. So we need you to help us build an army of informed citizens who understand why UBC is bad for Maine. Please help us spread the word. If you'd like to help, please feel free to grab some of that information up there. Please feel free to grab a whole stack of these business cards and hand them out to friends, family, neighbors, leave them with your tip with breakfast, whatever you do. So that's all I have. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if anyone has them. For more information, go to ubcbadforme.com. This is Todd Tolhurst for Gun Owners of Maine.